Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum. And I am got a big smile on my face if you look at the video. I'm with an old friend and colleague, Rachel Bernstein, who I've known for decades and worked together with. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist in LA, California, and she's been specializing in helping people recover from cults. You were doing the cult clinic in LA and New York. You've gotten into cult intervention and reacclimation for, you say, for 30 years. You're on the advisory board of the International Cultic Studies Association, and you've worked with the Department of Justice, providing support to cult victims who testify against their perpetrators. Excellent. And you were in the documentary Seduced about the Nexium cult with me. I had a cameo on hypnosis, but I think you were in your office with India Oxenberg, if I'm remembering correctly, whose mother is Catherine Oxenberg, and was a major force in exposing and bringing Keith Raniere to justice for trafficking and racketeering and a whole host of other things. You've done a ton of media, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, NPR, Bloomberg. But most importantly, for my listeners, I want to plug your podcast, Rachel, if I may, Indoctrination. And then nation is capitalized letters, and it's excellent. I've listened to you, and I love your little summaries at the end. I'm not going to steal that idea, but it's because it's your idea, but it's a great touch. You've also done a webinar series for cult survivors entitled Living in Freedom, and you have a website, Rachel Bernstein Therapy, and I happen to be an owner of your book that you wrote many years ago for kids about how to talk to your young ones about divorce. Parents are divorcing. So anyway, I've always appreciated your humanity, your common sense, your integrity, your values, and I've been doing this podcast wanting to reach out to other experts in the field so that people who read my books and they go, "Oh, you're an expert." I'm like, "Yeah, but there are others. There's a group of us, and we stand on the shoulders of other therapists. Certainly I do as a former cult member, and done a bunch of interviews and shout outs to people that I respect. So with that, I would like to leap in and talk about 2023, Rachel. The world's crazy, undue influences everywhere, and there's not enough of us to go around. We have so many people contacting us for help, and I know you're younger than me, but I'm like really thinking, how can I pass on my knowledge to the next generation? And how can we destigmatize the public's ignorance about people who've been in mind control cults? Because the tendency, as you well know, is, oh, there's something wrong with Steve for being in the Moonies. What was it, Steve? You were weak, you were looking for a daddy figure or whatever. And I'm like, no. Study social psychology and understand sleep deprivation is very powerful, and hypnosis is really powerful. So with that, I'm dishing to you, Rachel. Please share a bit more of your story. Maybe your dad, Maynard and the cult clinic, and that's how I met you initially, was through your dad. And then just what's going on that we can do to help people.
Okay, so it is so nice to talk to you. It is always nice, and I always love our interactions, and I love our history. And I've learned so much, and very often I'll come up with an idea, and someone will say, "Oh, is that your idea?" And I'll say, "Well, I probably got it from Steve Hassan, so I should probably say that. It's probably in his book somewhere." Yes, we are standing on the shoulders, and we're hoping that others will stand on ours. I mean, this is sort of this way of helping ensure the future, and I want to be a part of that as well. There is a great need. I saw this thing that someone posted on Facebook, and they had put a sticker on their window that said a David Lynch production, and it was just looking outside, and it said, now that helps explain sort of what we're looking at, that this is all this sort of dystopian kind of oddness that we're looking at, and we're trying to make sense of it, but it's hard to make sense of it. A lot of it doesn't make sense, and a lot of it is so polarized, and and a lot of it is so contentious and culty.
Yes.
And so I think that of course, we need to work on trying to bring civility back if we can, and
Yes.
common sense,
Yep.
and seeing if we can be less of a torch and pitchfork world, and meet people eye to eye.
Yep.
And so, with that, I mean, sort of to
So
go, yeah,
if
go
I
ahead.
may respond, just because you
Yes,
mentioned the
please.
David Lynch production,
Mm-hmm.
masterful filmmaker, but
Mm-hmm.
I have to jump in and say it's his foundation that's still pushing TM,
Right.
Transcendental Meditation, as if it's a good thing. And I've
Amazing.
been helping people for decades who've had bad experiences,
Mm-hmm.
including Gina
Mm-hmm.
Catania, who was raised in it and
Mm-hmm.
describes very eloquently the abuses of the children in that cult, as well
Mm-hmm.
as people. I was on a panel in Stockholm, an ex-member panel, ICSA to be specific, with Judith Bork, who is Maharishi's lover. And I met
Mm.
David Sisakind, who did David Wants to Fly documentary, which I did a blog about in Berlin when I was in Berlin.
Hmm.
So if any, I'm not dissing meditation because I meditate, but the
Mm-hmm.
TM, David
Mm-hmm.
Lynch connection,
Mm-hmm.
warning, warning. Because there's not
Right.
one way to meditate, and Maharishi was never an enlightened master. So sorry for
No,
that rant, but I just
no,
wanted to.
it's a good rant, and it's important, and it's good to know also what people are still touting and why, and how they can be, even with all the information that's out there. I've always wondered about that, why like people turn a purposeful blind eye. But speaking about the people who we have learned from and who we're learning with, so I'm, as part of the podcast, for the people who are the Patreon subscribers, I want to do a special thank you to them. So I do these bonus episodes, and I'm doing these special episodes on people like Robert J. Lifton and James Randi, and the people that I want people to know about. And I
Great.
interviewed Pat Ryan, and he was talking about TM, and he was trying, I said, so what is it that really started to bother you? And he said, when he wanted to be a speaker at one of the TM, I don't know what it was a conference or something, where he was going to go and speak to some people who were officials of some sort. And he said that he was willing to give this talk, but he also wanted to tell the truth
Mm,
and about the organization, because he thought that was in line with his spiritual teachings
right.
of honesty and getting to the truth. And they pulled him as a speaker when he said he was going to tell the truth, which was very
Yeah.
interesting.
So
So,
I'm
yeah.
glad you mentioned Pat Ryan because he has extensive information on TM. He's really done a deep dive.
Mm-hmm.
He told his story actually in the 1988 edition of Combating
Mm-hmm.
Cult Mind
Right.
Control.
Mm-hmm.
And good guy, just incredibly knowledgeable about TM. And I do want to just mention Arya Siegel, who is a former
Oh.
10-year member. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to say about Pat that he graduated Maharishi Mahesh Yogi Institute in Fairfield, Iowa, which was accredited. Maybe it still is. But
Yeah.
people need to understand more about the cultic destructive aspects. But then Arya Siegel was a teacher, and he's been really going hard against David Lynch Foundation, who's been
Good.
trying to get into VA hospitals, into school systems to teach TM. And they had tried that in the 70s, but the judge said, you can't call it not a religion when you're teaching it in school and a religion everywhere else. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
You can't put a, I think it was, can't put a sign horse on a cow and expect people, something, it was something funny. Anyway,
Uh-huh. But it's
we'll
true.
move on from TM now, but
Right.
yeah,
But it's the if it walks like a duck. Right.
yeah.
So, yeah. So, right. I mean, early on, you never know why you're going to do what you do. And I'm sure you weren't expecting when you went away to college that you were going to have this experience that was going to guide the rest of your life in terms of what was going to
Right,
matter to you and what messages you wanted to make sure people got from your experience that you were
right,
not expecting to have.
right.
But I think, when you have someone who's close to you, so it wasn't my personal experience of having been in a group, but seeing the changes of a loved one and seeing how drastic they were and seeing how suddenly someone seemed unreachable and unmovable and that there was something different in the look in their eye. And I had never seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had the experience, and you've probably had it too, of talking to people who have come out of groups, and suddenly the lights come back on. Like you
Oh,
realize,
yeah.
oh, they just arrived. Like, and I've said to people after I've been meeting with them, let's say for weeks, when I can see it that they're present, I'll say, "Welcome, nice to meet you,"
Yeah,
and so just to know that that can be taken away, that
yeah,
connectedness with the self is a very startling thing. And just to know throughout history that that's been used and abused, and that there are people out there more than willing to do that, which is also startling. Just to know we roam the planet with people who will freely abuse that power for their own gain, and sometimes just for their own entertainment, which is even worse. But
right.
there is something there was something that happened when it became dinner table conversation for me where my dad, well, I mean, I was raised in kind of an activist home, and I may have, mentioned this story to you, but I remember going to a lot of government rallies and visiting refuseniks in Russia, the Jewish people who were not able to practice religion or leave, and sometimes going to political rallies with my mom, and we'd be making signs. I was always making signs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'd be leaving the house, and my dad would be in the doorway, and he'd say, "Have fun, don't get arrested." Sort of the greeting, the ending, have a good
Mm-hmm.
day. So, but it was, if something matters to you, you do something about it, you say something about it for whatever, to whatever
Sure,
end. But
sure.
still, it's important to be a part of the process if you can. So then we were faced with a loved one who got ensnared, and it spoke to my dad. It spoke to my mom too, but my dad really ran with it because there was something about this. It was unconscionable to him that people could be out there stealing other people's children,
Well,
and that,
if I can interrupt for 1 second and just
yeah.
say, having known your dad, I
uh,
consider him a tzaddik, which is in the
mm,
Jewish religion a righteous man. And honestly, my recollection is he was just very aware of the Holocaust, and that
mm-hmm,
informed his
mm-hmm,
perspective on authoritarian cultism because he,
mm-hmm,
like me, looked at Hitler as a political cult leader.
mm-hmm.
And so that motivated both of us to be like, what, not on our watch if we can
Right.
do anything about it.
Right.
So,
Yeah. And yes, and I remember him talking about some of I mean, I was raised on a lot of this footage too, going to Jewish day schools and Jewish summer camps, and the seeing the Nazi rallies, at night with the bonfires and with music and with all of the things that then, when you watch, let's say, a Scientology rally that they have indoors, it's not different.
right,
And so there's so much that can work people up into a froth and
right,
make them disconnected, I think, from their own conscience and
right,
the evidence of what's happening, what's really real around them. So so I just saw it around me, and then I went to Boston University, as you know. We hung out while I was there, and I saw front names of different organizations, and I saw the Boston Church of Christ being a thing there, and
right.
going to the rabbi there, and he said, "Oh no, Jews don't get involved in cults," which meant he knew
Ha ha
nothing.
ha. Right.
And then I went to the head of Marsh Chapel, and I said, "There's an issue."
Dean Thornberg.
Oh,
Yes, I
that's
remember.
right. That's
Very
right.
well. I went to BU also, but not the
Right.
same year that you went. But yeah, they were very activist, anti-cultists while he was
Yes.
there.
He's
Um,
lovely. He's
yeah.
lovely. And he ended up educating the rabbi, which was good, but he said, yes, it's an issue. It really is. And then I would see busloads of kids being taken to some church, something in the mountains. And I remember I learned, I would ask these kids, do you know where you're going? Oh, we're going to a weekend away. I said, no, do you know where you're going? Well, we're going to the mountains. Do you know where you're going?
Yeah, and this
Well,
was
we're
before
going with,
cell phones with
right.
location services, I should add.
Yeah. And I knew, I said, what's the name of the organization? Do you have contact information? Do your parents know where you're going? I mean, I'm their age, but here I'm feeling like I'm a chaperone. Yeah, because I had information and I saw how also people don't ask questions, how they
Mm,
trust. And
mm,
I knew some of these people were not going to be continuing on in school because they were getting involved in something that was going to pull them away, and
yeah.
that wasn't told to them ahead of time. So it just continued where I just kept seeing the evidence of it in front of me. And when I started at the cult clinic in LA and had my first person who was a Scientologist who had climbed out of a window in one of the buildings, and she was on the RPF and the Rehabilitation Project Force, and she was scared out of her mind, and I didn't know Scientology to that degree.
Mm,
And so she was explaining to me what that was. And then she went back. She checked to see if, she also asked me if I was going to put electrodes on her. I mean, all the
mm.
things she had been told about
Programmed
therapists and,
phobias against mental health professionals. Yeah.
right. I remember meeting with her. I had to keep the door open, which I'm happy to do. I do a lot for a lot of former cult members who have been held against their will. We do a lot of work with the door open or on a bench
Sure.
outside. Um, And she was seen coming back into the building and was grilled until she said where she went. And so then I became this known person on, their naughty list.
Yeah, your
Uh,
dad was on their list at the very beginning, having started the LA Cult Clinic. And I
yes,
remember being asked by him to give a talk and help advise in the very early days of the Cult Clinic.
right,
So,
right. Yeah, he was harassed by Scientology. He was also harassed by the Moonies and by Hare Krishna. There were three groups that would sometimes call our home in the middle of the night.
mm,
And I still remember being a little shaken by it when I was
mm.
growing up. And I'd say, Dad, what are you going to do? And he'd say, I'm going to go back to sleep and not let the bullies win. What are you going to do? And
Oh.
there was something so calm about that, um, that
Your
I
dad
tried.
was like that. He was very calm and cool and very smart. He was a professional businessman, if I remember correctly, but he really was a sharp man. Miss him.
And yeah, I miss him. I miss him too. Yeah, he died way too young. And but I think about that when I'm harassed, when they try to
Mm,
complain to my board, when they try to do whatever, have their hate sites against me, whatever it is, and have me followed. I
mm,
think I think about that. I'm going to go back to sleep, not let the bullies win. And I had to not be as obvious for a while when my kids were young because I didn't want
mm.
them to have to deal with someone outside our house. And I,
Sure,
I wanted them to be old enough to give their consent, actually, to
sure.
have me continue doing this in any kind of public way. So until they were old enough, I didn't start a website. I didn't, start the podcast. I really
Hmm.
needed to find out if they were cool with what might happen. Um,
I might add,
and
that's a very important point that I tell my clients who want to be activists to really
Mm-hmm.
think about their children
Mm-hmm.
and to really, be considerate the way you are expressing you were about the relative benefits and risks and just putting your kids' well-being at the top of the list is
Mm.
kudos to you.
Thank you. I wouldn't have felt right, because I knew that I was scared when I was younger, with
Right.
this, and I didn't want to scare them, and I didn't want them to be worried for me, because
Right.
I know my kids. So, so yeah, it just kind of continued, and I thought, well, this will be a nice adjunct, and and then it became really the work that I do. Every once in a while, I have a client who has gotten in touch with me because I've done work with the siblings of kids with special needs, because I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
Right.
And so when they say, "Oh, we'd like to get some help because I have a son with autism, or I have some difficulty with my teenage daughter," I'm always waiting for and we're going to be getting on the mothership. Like there's this other piece that I'm just ready
To
for.
beam up, right.
Right? And it doesn't come, and I think, oh, that's right. This is how most of the world is, where things are just
Right.
things, and okay, I see them as sort of palate cleansers, and I like doing that work too. But
That's so funny, palate cleansers. But I think there's something in what you said that's wise that I want to highlight just for other therapists, because so many experience burnout because
mm,
they only take the most traumatized
right,
clients,
right,
guilty. I
yeah,
can't tell you how many times I burned out and then said I
yeah,
need to take a chill out and not do this. But just having like regular clients with like
yeah.
normal problems is a relief.
Right. Yeah, it
Mm,
is a relief, and it also helps me. It helps me keep things in perspective. That not everyone
mm,
is going through the stories that we
right.
hear, and and also that things can also, and sometimes it's helpful because with things that are just sort of the normal problems, um, it helps me remember that some of the things we hear about really are intense, and
Yeah.
I've gotten desensitized to it, and
Mm,
I've had to let people know. If you ask me about a case, I might tell you about things that you're not used to hearing about, and I might say it in a very plain way because I've heard it so many times.
mm,
And so I'll sometimes, like with my podcast team, I'll ask them to keep me in check. Like this person who wants to speak on the podcast and they want to talk about X, is that alarming to the general public? It's not alarming to me anymore, and
right.
I need the feedback, and to know what we might need to edit to make it palatable.
Sure.
Because I don't want to scare people away.
Yeah, I think in general it's great to have a team to get feedback, to say,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Steve, stop interrupting your guests. I'm like, I know I have this bad problem. I'm trying to be more conscious, but
Uh-huh.
I'm so excited and I want to share, and the person
Mm-hmm.
hasn't stopped to take a breath yet, and the point's like going into the next room. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a work in progress. So
It's
I've
a,
already interrupted you once, so I'm apologizing, and I'm really trying to be listening
well,
more and
but
shutting
it's
up more.
hard.
Yeah.
I mean, I get excited also, and I'm like, oh, and there are things that I want to say, right? Um, and then also, there are also times people will pose, and I'm sure you have this problem. People will say, and I guess there's just no way to solve that, or there's no way to answer that question, and you're like, pick me, pick me. Yeah, wait, I know. Wait, no, I have it.
Yeah, been doing it for 30 years. Hello.
Uh-huh,
40
right.
years, 47
Yeah.
years. Yeah,
So I'll often say, listen, I know you're saying these things as though they're hypotheticals, but there actually is an answer.
right.
And if it hasn't been offered before to you, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I've just learned it from working with these people. If you
Right.
are wanting just to go through your list of questions that you think are unanswerable, fine. But I'm making notes because there is actually an answer.
Mm.
So pick me,
Yeah.
when we're done, and I'm happy to answer them. And
Yeah.
and the other thing that I love to, besides the podcast, because I get to hear not only people telling their stories, but from lots of other people who are doing this work and who are trying to figure out what to do legally to help
Sure.
people who are watching out for whole populations, people who are trafficked, people who are trying to help the law define consent. I mean, these I that and people who are watching, like the ADL, who are watching what's happening politically, and
Mm.
I want to hear from people because I feel reassured. I mean, maybe I do it selfishly. I feel reassured knowing there are people who are working on these things and hopefully making some inroads, because so much needs to happen, which we probably need to talk about today. But one of the other things I want to mention is the support group that I do, which
Please.
I think, I don't know who enjoys it more. It's like one of these things where I'm like, I just sort of drink it in. When I know that, and as you've experienced, bringing people together or doing an intervention or talking at a conference, when someone has felt supremely alone and not understood or judged, or they've gone to therapy or other groups that were sort of adjunct but not quite matching what they were needing, that they can just talk and have people get it. And you can see they just are breathing deeply, like, finally, they can kind of relax.
Yep.
Like they're in good company with people who understand. They don't have to explain themselves. They don't have to be worried about being dismissed or being misunderstood. It feels so good. And I love those moments of hearing people also use their experience to support other people. And I don't know. I just love it.
Right. And I assume that you check people out before you put them together with others, because
Yes.
actors try to sneak in, or people who are
Yes.
inappropriate to be in a group setting. So talk a little bit
Yes.
more about your model, because I think it's really important.
So I'm really glad you brought that up. So early on in my career at the cult clinic, before it was effectively shut down by not only by Scientology pressure, but by Tony Alamo, who was picketing out in front of it, who is this cult leader who's since passed away. Couldn't
Who
have happened to a nicer
molested
person.
his children and was
Right.
guilty of trafficking, and the Southern Poverty Law Center did a whole expose that got him locked up. Please
Yeah.
continue.
So, yeah, no, he was awful. And I remember he had Rachel Andress, and I would go to these shops where they were selling these jackets that his group members were making that had these studs on them and were
For
very flashy.
celebrities, right? Really
Right,
expensive handmade,
right.
sequins and whatever else jackets.
For all of his unpaid, for
Right.
his slave labor, basically.
Yep. Hmm.
So he didn't like that we were informing shopkeepers about this, that they were supporting someone who was an awful person.
Yep.
Uh, so in any event, I remember doing a support group there and having it be for former cult members, and I and two people showed up who said that they were former Christians, which isn't a cult necessarily. And I said, "Now tell me more about why you're here." And while they were there, while they're introducing themselves, they said that they were Scientologists.
Mm.
And they wanted to make sure to mention that they were Scientologists and that that's why they were there. And I said, "You're not former, you're current Scientologists." "Yes, but we're former Christians." So I knew they're up to something, and I took
Right.
them aside. And I said, "Is the reason," because I'd already been through this once, "is the reason that you mentioned that you're a Scientologist to make people on edge who are here who are Scientologists, because now they know they're going to be watched and reported? But also,
Ex-Scientologist. Yep.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
also that then if I tell you you can't be in the group, you can then say that it's religious persecution, that it's because you're Scientologist." So they looked at each other like, you know.
Got their number, Rachel.
And I said, "You know what? I actually don't care. And whatever happens, happens, but you can't go back in the room."
Hmm.
And because I knew there was someone there for the first time who had just left Scientology, was scared out of her mind that there was going to be
Sure.
someone there reporting back. It needed to be a safe place.
Sure.
And I didn't want the tricks. But yeah, so then there was a suit. I mean, they make it impossible.
Well,
And
that's what they used to close the Cult Awareness Network down, was,
yeah,
suing
right.
for membership in 20 different states, exhausting the insurance fund. And
So
Scientology
cool.
needs to lose its tax exemption status, and David Miscavige needs to go to jail as a trafficker and join Keith Raniere, in
Oh,
my
and the
professional
stories.
opinion.
Yes. I mean, the stories you hear about David Miscavige and just the sociopathy, just, just
Yep.
how he's sadistic. In any event, yes. So to go back to your question, yes,
Yes,
I
sorry.
vet people before I have a conversation with them. I try to get a sense of if I can also try to see them in person. If they say, no, I just want to talk on the phone, then I'm going to have to wonder why. But I want to gauge them, and
Sure.
and then also I reserve the right to have people not come back. And yeah, for some people, sharing the time is just too hard because they have more they need to talk about, and so sometimes I'll offer them a couple times just to talk privately, to talk
Right.
more, to get more out before they come back to the group.
Right.
But there are other people too who were leaders in like large group awareness trainings who I've noticed take over the group.
Yes.
And then they start calling on other people to talk instead of me. And they will say,
I'm
well, we're
sorry
now,
for laughing, but I
right?
totally get it. I
And I'll
totally.
hear one of them say, well, we only have 5 minutes left. So did anyone else want to say, I'm like, wait, I'm sorry, what? But they've had to learn, and I've had to guide them after, like, this is not.
Yeah, you're not in the cult anymore, and you need to learn
Right,
boundaries, please, as part of your
right.
healing.
Yes. And what I have done too, even though I do try to make sure to vet people as much as I can humanly do,
Mm-hmm.
I've let people know that they can participate. I reassure people that if I've given someone the ability or the choice to
Mm-hmm.
have their camera off or to not share, to not introduce themselves quite yet and just listen and see if they feel safe,
Mm-hmm.
that's okay for as long as they need to do that. And I want to be able to let people know, even if you can't see this person, I know who they are.
Uh-huh.
And I've talked to them, and they're just needing a group session or two to feel comfortable enough to appear,
Mm-hmm.
because of how they've been treated in the past or whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So
it's
it
there's a
sounds like
lot of
it's virtual, Rachel, your support groups.
so
Is that because
right,
of COVID, or is that because of there's too
yeah.
many people that need your help?
So it's an interesting thing. It was in my office, and then what happened was when in my office, people started contacting me from other places, wanting to know if they could participate. And one or two people, then I would bring my laptop and I would set them up like they're a person there and on a
Right.
chair.
Right.
And then it just got to be another person, another person. I thought this is now getting
Sure.
to be too much of a mix of, technology and in person. It was too hard
Yeah.
it felt odd. So I now do it virtually, and it's given people a chance from now all over to join. And there's some parents and other loved ones who are there wanting to talk as well,
Hmm.
wanting to hear from the former members about what helped them leave, and if their parent had reached out to them, what would have been a good way to do it or a bad way. They sort of offer
So
each other guidance.
that's fascinating. So in other words, it's a mixed group, including former members as well as family members.
Right. It started out just with former members, and then there was
Uh-huh.
a mom who wanted to, you know, who found out about the group and said, "Can I join in one time just to see if I can ask them some questions? Because I have a little bit of contact with my loved one, and I feel like I'm not doing it quite right. And I'd love to
Hmm.
hear from people who've had the experience, if
Hmm.
they can guide me." And I asked the people if they wouldn't mind taking some of their time
Hmm.
to share, and they actually some of them really kind of liked the idea
Hmm.
of being able to use what they learned to help someone else. So it's a
Hmm.
mix. It's much more, I'd say it's like an 80-20 split with 80 former members, but there
So,
are some parents.
so is there a top limit of how many people you can have at one time?
So just to make sure that everyone has enough time to talk, and it's a 90-minute group,
Yeah.
I limit it to about 10 to 12.
Okay.
And if it's more than that, I'll extend the time to 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
if people have the time and if they want to stay on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, dealing with things also where, like, if someone's late or they're running late, and then I'll get a text, I don't know if I should join. I don't want to show that I'm not with integrity.
Hmm.
I don't want to be yelled at because I'm late. All the conditioned responses of fear. that I help people just deal with, like if they cut out. A lot of people initially, like if they were late coming to my office, they'd be too afraid to come in.
From the
I
cult, you mean?
Right,
Mm,
because they would have been berated. That would have
right,
been the topic, even though it was beyond their control.
right.
I've needed to assure people that they're not going to be talked about when they're not there,
Mm-hmm.
because of what they've been through, also being shamed in person and also in their absence.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that I'm not going to be contacting them in between the groups. That I'm not going to be. Oh, and also if I ask a question, they don't have to answer it. And we've
Mm-hmm.
had to actually do some role play with that,
Mm,
because they didn't believe me that that would be okay.
mm,
But it was a liberating thought that just because someone asks you a question doesn't mean you have to answer it. That's
mm-hmm.
kind of a new one for a lot of people, especially born and raised
Mm-hmm.
in cults. So, yeah,
So
it's
can
been
I ask a
interesting.
few more questions? Because
Please
part
do,
of
please
what
do.
I'm excited
Yeah.
about is to share with the public
Mm-hmm.
different experts' approaches to
Mm-hmm.
healing and
Mm-hmm.
helping former victims recover is one of the things I think of you as one of the most experienced people on the planet, frankly.
Mm.
And I do want to say that there are some people walking around who say, you can't really be a good therapist if you're not a former cult member. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. But you have
Mm.
to want to learn and you have to have
Oh,
a high degree of empathy and compassion and be a good listener, you know?
right, and have humility. I would never come in to say I know how you feel, or I know what that feels like. I've never said that because I don't, and
No
I
one
haven't.
does.
Right, and no one does, especially right.
Right,
But to have the humility to come from a place, I know it's coming from behind. Like, no, this was not my own experience,
right,
but I want to be able to be a resource because there were so few people doing it.
right.
Um, but anyway, yeah. So yeah, I've learned most in terms of the practical work from the clients and just taking notes about what
Yeah.
worked and what didn't after each time.
Yeah, and then you
Go ahead.
notice
Sorry.
patterns, right,
Mm-hmm.
between the
Mm-hmm.
different clients. So, is your meetings with former members weekly? Or is it like a 10 session run? Or like, do you have rolling admissions as people, in a sense don't need it anymore and want to take a break? Can you say a little bit more about your.
Right. So there are different things that have worked over the years. So for a while, I was doing an 8 session meeting where
Mm-hmm.
people signed up for 8 sessions, paid for 8 sessions, and then they wanted it structured that each meeting, well, of course, the thing that's most important is for people to talk about what's on their mind, or
Sure.
some things time dated, like they're dealing with something coming up soon that that gets precedence. But then they wanted a subject,
Mm-hmm.
like whatever it was that they wanted to be able to hear about, or take, or Cialdini's
Yeah,
influence. Right,
themes and strategies and skills. Yeah, I can
right.
relate to that. Go on.
So that worked with certain people.
Mm-hmm.
And then other and people who really liked it to be structured, it made them feel safe, also
Mm.
knowing that it was structured, there was going to be an end to it.
Mm-hmm.
uh, because there had been messiness at the ends of things for them before when it wasn't clear. There was the expectation that somehow they were
Mm.
going to still continue on, even though they were just told it was going to be, let's say, for a certain amount of time. So to model that 8 sessions was going to be 8 sessions, and that it wasn't just going to, well, if you really are committed to this work, you'll continue. I'm not going to play that,
Right.
but I would just start fresh and say, I'm going to have another eight,
Yeah.
and we can start again. But others, what happened was that when people started joining, there then wasn't enough time for people to do two things. One is that when there were more people participating, there wasn't enough time then for me to bring up my subject because it was going to take the place
Right.
of people talking about what was really on their mind. And so I realize it's too hard to do both with a larger group.
Right.
And I don't want to assume that what's on my mind is more important than what's on theirs. Um, But also, then there were people who took many sessions just to feel comfortable enough.
Right.
And so, eight it might seem like a lot for someone else, but not someone who's really been burned
Mm-hmm.
and is scared. And
Right.
sometimes it was only by the eighth that they feel comfortable. So, I might do that model again at some point,
Mm.
and I might have it concurrent
Mm.
where I do both models for different groups and people can choose what works for them best because I
Mm.
think it again for some it really did feel good and others it didn't quite work. So now it's more open-ended and it's every other week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, although I think I could probably do it every week, but it's every other week for now and it's an hour and a half and it's in the evenings and
Mm.
it's on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, and then I just use that as an opportunity instead of bringing up a subject, unless they have a subject in mind that they want to ask me
Right.
about. I'm happy to. I just let them know about conferences coming up, about other organizations I'm finding out about that would be interesting for
Right.
that could offer them other support, sort of other resources.
Mm-hmm.
So we spend the first like 15, 20 minutes having people go around and introduce themselves if there's anyone new. And
Mm.
again, they can choose to not say anything and to pass. And that's okay. And then during their introduction, if there's something they want to make sure to talk about or ask about, I'll make a note of it and then come back to them. And I'll
Mm-hmm.
just try to be mindful of the time that we,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
So I have another
cover.
question
Yes, please.
for my listeners. So,
Yeah.
um, unlike cults, I am curious about how you handle people sharing their names and their contact information, as well as keeping them to confidentiality, that everything that happens in the room stays, or the Zoom room stays in the Zoom room and not recorded and things like that.
Right. Okay. So the not recorded part, right? I wish I could control what anyone might be doing, like under the table. They might be recording things and they could still be doing that in person, in their wallet or purse.
Or they could be using a screen recorder these days, is what I've
Right.
learned about.
Right. Absolutely. Right. So what I have let people know is that I can try to assure as much as I'm able
Yeah.
that I am going to try to keep their information in house, that I'm going to make sure the group knows that this is information that is shared and that among us and needs to not be taken out anywhere else. But that I also want them to be realistic about the fact that we can't guarantee. And if there's anything that they think is really going to put them in danger,
Yeah.
or if they are not out yet to the group and they're
Right.
worried that this is going to get back and it's going to really ruin their life in some way, it's not worth it.
Right.
And that's something they can just talk to me privately about.
Yeah, it's not appropriate to be public, even in a private Zoom session.
Right. And just because I can't make a promise that I can't keep and that I can't, and with other people involved, I can't
Right.
assure them. But I will hope that people kind of come to trying to meet the standard of protectiveness that I try to convey for the
Right.
people in the group towards each other.
Right.
And then with people putting their names on the screen, I mean, they can actually call themselves whatever they want, and I call them by whatever it is, and it could be initials.
Right.
There are a couple people also who were renamed within their cult, and
Mm.
they have used each group as a way to try out a new name.
Mm.
And they've asked me to put their name as the host. I can put whatever name they say
Right.
under their, with their face.
Yeah.
And they try it out. Like they hear people call them that to see if it fits. And so they're trying out this sort of identity as part of the group, which is interesting.
Fascinating.
Um, and um, and yeah, and there's some people I notice as they get more comfortable, they then will change to have their name, their real name. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when I see that they're trusting the space, more and, or enough to do that, or at least thinking that if something were to happen, they could handle it. Like,
Right.
um, but I blind copy everyone on the reminders. And if someone wants to be in touch with someone else privately, or they have such a similar story and they really want to connect, I'll just get permission from both parties to be in touch with each other
Got
separate
it.
from the group.
So you're the gatekeeper. Do you have a
I'm the
chat
gatekeeper.
function happening, or
Yeah,
an emotional emoticons or emojis that
right.
people can
Yeah.
use
And
too?
right. So some people, if they know how to be in touch with, or they know the person's actual name, they'll send a private chat to
Right.
them, and or they'll send something to me saying, "I'm fine with you giving out my email to so and so."
Great.
And but yeah, they have to go through me. I just to add an extra layer
Great.
of protection.
So I wanna move if we can.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is our,
please.
our time is flying by.
Yeah.
We can talk for hours, but I know that we've done some cases with uh, people over 18 who were
Hmm.
totally mind controlled, trafficked. Um,
Right.
and I know you've been asked to be an expert witness, and in the bio, you were consulting with DOJ. Can you talk about, because I went and did my doctorate because I want to update the law and make it
Hmm.
like a
Hmm.
recognizable, definable thing instead of this nonsense. Oh, it's a slippery slope. We can't decide if anyone's exerting undue influence. It's like, please, it's 2023. You read the
Yeah,
news. Do you know how many
exactly.
people think that Putin's a good guy and that the election was stolen still, or QAnon is a great, valid concept? So anyway, I want to hear a little bit of the nuggets of your wisdom on this
Mm.
phenomenon, and any, if there's any lawyers listening, judges listening,
Hmm.
or people who want to change the law that are looking for a hot cause to get behind and fund,
Yes. Yes,
please.
absolutely. And there was a woman who was on my podcast, Carol Murchison, who contacted me to talk about what she's doing, and she's now focusing on spiritual abuse cases with people who are doing, sort of meditation and other kinds of yoga
So
groups,
she's a
and
lawyer.
she's a lawyer, and now
Oh,
she's part of a practice that is specifically dealing with spiritual abuse cases. So I was very happy to meet her, and she's probably overwhelmed now with the amount of cases that I've sent her.
good.
I'll pass along that information to you too. But there may be others like her, and there probably are. I just don't know of them. I wish I knew of more people. Um, the latest case that I did that was very frustrating because of the law. Ugh,
Yep.
oh. Okay, so, and I'll try to keep it really short because this was about a year long thing. I was contacted by the Department of Justice to deal through a victims assistance program to work with women who had been in La Luz del Mundo.
Oh,
And
yeah. Tell the
they
listeners about that cult. Horrible.
So, oh, horrible group. So now the leader is in jail. He's the son of the original leader, and they were trafficking young girls through these underground tunnels, where they had to do a lot of things, and
Sexual abuse.
sexual abuse. They had to, with the money that they made through, basically he pimped them out, and
Yeah.
with that money they needed to buy sexy outfits to dance for him, to turn him on when they're 8, 9, 10. I mean, I could
Sounds
go.
like Bose's David Berg and the Children of
Yes,
God. Yeah.
yes, and then he would drive them, or his limo driver would drive them to abortion clinic. They'd wait outside. The girls would go in. They'd get yelled at or screamed at by the doctors or nurses there for being whores.
Mm.
Then have to go back into the limo and go back and have the same thing happen. And the families, by and large, were proud that their daughters were chosen because he was God.
Mm.
So knowing that I'm, dealing with this population of girls who are now 18, 19, 20,
Right.
trying to figure out how to live their lives, how to, and they knew they were going to need to face him in court, and
Yeah.
they didn't know what to do. So they wanted me to do some counseling for these girls, many of whom opened up right away to me, some of whom took a while. They were very scared, and they
Sure.
had to hide from their families to talk to me because for some of them, their families were still involved.
Right.
The problem that happened was, though, suddenly they decided to cut off funding for this that they had signed me up for with them, and I was already working with them for about 4 or 5 months, and they had just started to really trust me. And hearing some of these stories, I mean, it was despicable.
Yeah, I know
Just
the group. It's terrible.
suddenly, I got a letter the same day they got a letter. Okay, we think you're done. The court case wasn't going to be for another about 4 or 5 months, and they were just working up towards. We were going to be talking about sort of role playing. Imagine that you see him in court, and
Right.
you still think he's God. What do you do? How do you manage your emotions, your breathing? We
Right.
couldn't get to any of it because
Mm.
suddenly it was cut off. And I appealed and I contacted them, and they said, no, we think this is enough. Like for a whole lifetime of abuse, 4 months was fine and I ended up continuing to work with them for free because I couldn't drop them.
Yeah, I hear you.
And they said, we're fine, we're going to refer them to someone else we have on our contact list. And I said, can I see the contact list? And it was this old like mimeographed list, and some of these numbers, it was like before there were zip codes and area codes. Like there it was so old.
Right.
And so these girls were calling numbers, and this person's out of business, and they just hear a dial tone. They couldn't find anyone. And then finally, they may have found someone who knew nothing about cults and undue influence and manipulation, but just someone who they could afford to see. So I said, never mind. I'm going to continue until this trial talking to these women. Some ended up wanting to pay me privately through work that they had gotten. I said, please just make it through the court date. That will be my payment.
Mm.
And then he got very little. I mean, very little. It was a very short sentence, like maybe 16 years, and then he would be off sooner for good behavior.
Terrible.
What he did, was really horrible, but the law was just not, there wasn't a system in place that they could sort of neatly just find themselves in and protected by. They had to keep pushing, and I had to keep pushing. And even people at the victims department, this place, they were frustrated. They're like, we're trying to really push for these girls, but there's nothing we can do, and they're saying they're fine now, and even though they didn't talk to any of them.
Mm.
So they just had limited funding, I guess, and they wanted the funding to go somewhere else. And then I found out later, I said I had to find out. I actually contacted an attorney at my own expense to try to find out what happened. And turns out that the person in charge of that department who was overseeing it retired. They then had a new person, and just through a lapse in paperwork, it wasn't picked up as something to be funded. And so
Right.
they just decided to tell the girls they were done.
That
So
makes
there
more
was just
sense. There was no
no oversight,
continuity. And they
no
probably had
continuity.
budget cuts, would be my guess
Right.
also. It's another
Yeah.
thing. Rachel, do you know Marcy Hamilton?
No, I don't.
So I just did an interview with her for the podcast, and she asked me to speak to a law school class at UPenn.
Mm.
But she's someone that you should know about. She's the CEO of ChildUSA.org.
Oh, yeah.
And she's joined the lawsuit against Miscavige and Scientology on behalf of the
Ah,
three children who were trafficked, who are
right,
suing.
right.
And her think tank is for children. And what I learned last week when I interviewed her is they now define children as 25, not
Oh, thank
18.
God.
Because we
Thank
know the
God.
neuroscience is people need more time to grow their frontal
Mm-hmm.
cortex and to find
Mm-hmm.
out, to really develop. We're mammals, but we are humans, and we're not mature at 18. And anyway, she's
No.
a godsend, and people donate to her, and they should, because she wrote God versus the Gavel. Like, she clerked for Sandra Day O'Connor. She's
Ooh.
a very smart activist, great woman, and
Okay.
so anyway, for the future, great resource. And even if the people are 25, 30 now, but the abuse happened when they were a minor. It still counts because
Wow.
she's been working to lift the statute of limitations around the country.
God, I wonder. Oh, that's an incredible thing to 25. I wonder maybe they won't send people to war to fight until they're
That's
25.
so it's a can of worms, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Because the
Mm-hmm.
CIA doesn't want the public to know,
Mm-hmm.
oh, we know about psyops. We've been doing it for decades on other
Right.
countries, and people like
Right.
Mike Flynn are doing it on us in the United States for the Christian right because they want to impose their view of religion on the rest of us that and take away women's right to choose and gay rights. Um, so the whole psyops piece is another big can of worms. Nobody wants to talk about it. No one wants to talk about my former cult being involved with intelligence operations with the Korean CIA and the American CIA.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it hasn't stopped me because
Good.
it's I look to your dad as one of my early role models, if I
Mm.
may,
Mm.
because it ain't right, and I can do it. I have been blessed with intelligence and privilege, and 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 uh, and so I do it for everybody else too.
Yes.
Like the planet tikkun olam, that's a Jewish
Right.
term for repairing the world. The
Right.
world needs a lot of repair, and I went on another rant. Forgive me, but
No, but
we
it does. There's so much that needs to be done, and
yeah.
no one, no one should be bored right now. There's always something to do. There is more to do than we have time to do. So
Right.
everyone needs to get busy. If they're having free time and feeling down about it, oh please, 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 please get involved in something, whatever it is. Um,
Yes.
okay.
Amen. Amen to that. And I
Mm-hmm.
want to circle back to the very beginning. We were talking about bringing the world back to civility and common
Yes.
sense.
Yeah.
And I know the most powerful way to teach is to role model to the extent that we're able to
Yeah.
be courteous and kind and humble. And, I was on a train to New York. I was being interviewed, and an elderly person was trying to lift their, luggage, and put it in the thing. Nobody's moving, so I just got up and moved it, and
Uh-huh.
but everybody was looking at me, huh? And I was like,
Wow.
they needed help
Wow.
too, but I
Right.
didn't like shame anybody. I just acted like, of course, that's the natural right thing to do. And I
Right.
think
Of
that's what we need to
course.
do. And now there's all brain research about how good it makes us feel for doing nice things. And it makes other people replicate it and pass it on to other people. So there is a positive contagion effect by social modeling.
Oh, absolutely. I'm sure all the times that you hear thank you, right? I mean, it just settles into a nice place in your heart.
Totally.
Yeah, and it can feed you and it can be a nice balancer for the times that you're given a lot of crap.
Well,
It
that's
really,
exactly right. Because we
Um,
both get harassed. And, I just opened a letter with all kinds of obscene, nasty
oh,
things from a Trump
oh,
person. But
yeah,
I get an email or a message, your book helped me so much, or thank you for your
right.
podcast, or whatever. So it's like way neutralizes any of the junk.
And what I think too, even though I want everyone to read all of your books, your lexicon, I mean, the cult of Trump has been adopted,
Yeah.
and I don't know if people are giving you the credit for that. But
No.
that's become the way people have understood it, thank goodness, since your book.
Yeah, but I still hope people will read it, and if they don't have the money, go to the library, and I actually have recordings of me reading it for free at your
Oh, good.
library. It actually gives an explanatory framework for what's happening today. I mean, I
Right.
asked Simon and Schuster if I could do an updated edition, and they were
Mm-hmm.
like, "No, we think people are weary of Trump." And I'm like, "Excuse me?
No,
You
no.
don't think there's a market for
Mm-mm.
understanding what's happening and how to fix things?" But anyway,
Right. No. Wow. Well, anyway, I mean, it's always so good to talk to you. As I talk to you, I realize that we could be talking for days. There is so much to talk
Well,
about,
let's
but
do it
just,
again soon.
yeah, I would love
And
that.
and we need more Rachel Bernsteins on the planet. So if you're listening to this and thinking, I'm going to have to declare a major in college,
Oh, yes,
I'm
please, please.
inclined to becoming a therapist or a social worker or somebody.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? I'm like, yeah, we need more people, please. But
Yeah.
understand it's not an easy population. Because it is what it is. But there's, in my opinion, nothing more vital than understanding undue influence.
Right. And bringing people back to having the freedom to be themselves, to live their lives, to have agency,
Right.
to think their own thoughts, to be who they were maybe supposed to be before they got
Yes.
derailed. Then other things are possible, but with that, nothing's possible.
Yep.
So yeah, so if people are interested, please, yes. I wish there were a way to kind of do a full scale training. I mean, I
Yeah,
would
we
love to.
will. We'll do more.
Okay, good.
I already put a course up, a foundational course, but it's me talking to PowerPoints and showing some videos. But we need to do,
Yeah, we
a
do.
lot more. And I want to circle back as we wrap up just to you being at BU, at Dean Thornburg, who
Hmm.
used to have us speak to freshmen and transfer students to warn them to hand out leaflets if
Yeah.
you get queried and be invited to something before
Hmm.
you go. Check with us because we may have
Hmm.
a file on them. And there's a Hulu special coming out February 9th on the Larry Ray Sarah Lawrence
Yes.
cult, where
Hmm.
this con artist, narcissist, trafficker, he's been convicted to trafficking and racketeering to 60 years in jail. He moved into his daughter's dorm room and took
Hmm.
over all of her friends for 10
Yes.
years and trafficked at least one or two of them. So it's still
Yes.
happening, people. It's not the
Hmm.
70s only.
Mm-mm. No, and it's something the college knew nothing about. I talked to some of the people who were in it, some of the people who were interviewing some of the people who were in it,
Yep.
and someone who wrote a book called
Dan
Slonim None.
Levin. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
he was on the show and he was like shaking his head, like, how? What? And it was right under the noses of this college. And there's some places that really do give kids free reign, and it's a wonderful, open kind of environment, but sometimes too open. Sometimes there's not enough oversight and people watching what's happening. But even if they are, they find a way to somehow get away with it. So your point is well taken. It's still happening in different forums, and people are getting derailed from their lives
And
and
Daniel was
losing.
afraid, he said, to tell anyone about his experience for years and couldn't
Yeah,
call it a cult for years until
right.
he started opening that door. But he said writing the book was so therapeutic for him because it got
Yeah.
it out of his head. And he was a poetry major
Mm.
and 19. I was 19 and a poetry major. So I said when I
Mm,
read your book, it reminded me of me when I was
right.
19 and I got sucked into the Moonies. And frankly, it makes me want to write again. Just he was inspiring to me. So that was
Oh,
sweet.
nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
So, Rachel
Okay, good.
Bernstein, thank you.
Thank
Indoctrination, her
you. Mm,
podcast.
yeah.
What's your website again, please?
RachelBernsteinTherapy.com. And yeah, and new episodes come out of the podcast every Wednesday.
Mm-hmm.
And they're bonus episodes for the Patreon supporters and some fun merchandise, which has been cute.
Great, great.
But yeah, it's so good to talk to you, and thank you so much. There need to be more Steve Hassens. I don't know if that's possible, but we can try. Uh,
We don't need any more of me, but we need more other unique selves to take
yes,
the gauntlet, is the gauntlet or the goblet
I
or
don't know,
something,
something
and
to have
move things forward.
right, and to
Yeah.
have tenacity. So
Yeah.
thank you for your tenacity.
Thanks so much, Rachel Bernstein.
Mm.